Welcome back to the Auto Obsessive Garage. Chadwick with you again. Thanks for tuning in to another installment of the Project Turbo Boosty Miata. On this thrilling episode, we're going to continue with our timing belt water pump job, get to those seals we need to replace. So we're doing the 2 cam seals and the crank seal. We're also going to get under there and hopefully get that crank bolt out easily without breaking too much. Foreshadowing. So let's go in and dive in on that. More of the same from continuing last episode's theme. I just want to be as detailed as possible for anybody trying to do this themselves. It's a little bit of an involved process, so enjoy the show, guys. Here we go. Now would be a great time to pull these spark plugs out if you haven't done so already. So let's go ahead and pull those out of each cylinder. Now before we go forward, once you have the spark plugs out, we're going to go ahead and find top dead center of cylinder number 1. To do so, get yourself a really long screwdriver, preferably not too sharp, and ease it down into the spark plug well. Don't drop it down there, don't spike it down there. We don't want to dent that piston. And what we're going to go ahead and do is grab a 21mm socket and go ahead and rotate the crank, get the engine moving. This screwdriver is going to go up and down with the motion of the piston. When it's at its highest point, you'll know you're at top dead center. Okay, let's keep an eye on the screwdriver and we're watching it to get the highest point. And that should be it. When it reaches its highest point, another way to check is check all your timing marks. If your car was timed correctly before you started this process, you're in a good spot. Now this will not help you. Timing marks won't matter if this belt has broken or timing was off with the vehicle. On the Miata engine, we're checking a couple things here. Good sign is the intake cam and exhaust cam both pointing up perfectly straight. Awesome. You also have these secondary marks here where you're going to line up the notches here. One here that kind of points to this little mark here, and then you're going to have an eye pointing to this mark here. The next timing mark you're checking is down on the crank itself. So you're going to look at this arrow that's cast into the side of the engine here, and it's going to be in this little notch on that crank bolt. And that's going to tell you that your crank's lined up. So everything is timed perfectly on this vehicle now. Another way to check your timing, you want to count 19 teeth between the 2 timing marks on the cams here. So let's go ahead and do that right now and just make sure we're good to go here. Perfectly timed engine right now. We're also going to secure the engine at top dead center with a little trick I learned on the interwebs. We're going to take some basic crescent wrenches and we're going to secure them. You actually have some flat spots on your cam lobes that you can attach these to, and then use a locking vice grip to kind of hold the whole mechanism together. So let's go ahead and do that now. Now we're going to use the Flying Miata cam locking tool to kind of hold these guys in place. Alright, I'm very well aware that this is probably overkill, but I don't really like the idea of doing timing belts twice. I've got this handy dandy Flying Miata, basically a crank bolt puller to pull that really stubborn crank bolt off. I'm going to hit it with some PB Blaster too to just make it go a little smoother. But this thing's pretty awesome. You can actually brace it against numerous things. You can use the thermostat or the water pump neck and kind of get yourself some resistance to pull back so you can twist that cap off. I didn't record that, but it wasn't pretty. This crank bolt was stuck on there really hard, so I used the Flying Miata brace, which worked good in conjunction with my 1/2-inch breaker bar, and that got it to crack loose. And when it cracked loose, it really cracked loose. It sounded like I snapped the whole crank in half, so it was on there really tight. Oh yeah, look at that. Anti-seize is your friend. Pretty crazy. I mean, look at that. That is definitely in there really hard. Fun stuff. This little plate should just pop right off. I don't know what its problem is. Looks like that's on there pretty good too, so let's go ahead and spray that down with some PB Blaster and let it sit a bit. Alright, we'll come back and check that out in a moment. Alright, time to pull off the cam gears. Release the tensioner here, get this belt tension off. But it helps to have it to break these loose. This is the little piece that you usually just pull off by hand after you pull that crank bolt out. And as you can see here with all the kind of corrosion and rust, this thing was effectively welded on. And there's really no place to get a good angle on it, so just kept pulling my hands, lots of PB Blaster. This is seriously one of the hardest parts I've ever had to remove. It was on there so hard. Good times. Here we're looking at where the crank pulley was, everything that came off of it, and you can just see the amount of kind of corrosion and rust there. And I was thinking to myself, what caused all this to happen? It had to be a water pump that was leaking for an extended period of time. That's the only thing I can think of. That water constantly going down in here, worked its way in there and just totally rusted everything. And rust in high torque parts, I mean, the crank bolt has so many foot-pounds, over 100 for sure, but so much torque and a little bit of water works its way in there over an extended period of time, and boy, that is as good as a weld. So hopefully I can get the Woodruff key out and slide that sprocket off, which you can see I did a really awesome thing here, and trying to pry it out, which usually is a safe thing to do. It just simply snapped, so I'll need to replace that. Fantastic. Good time. Now, if anyone needed convincing that a water pump leak should be taken care of in a very timely manner, here's some more evidence for you. That is where the crank gear just came off, and by just came off, I mean I had to exert an incredible amount of force, hammer strikes, you know, almost resorted to using heat. I mean, just look at this condition. What we're looking at here is a lot of surface rust. And keen-eyed viewers will notice that there were chips taken out of this thing. So that was me trying to use the pry bar to get it to kind of release. Holy crap. So I got a new one of these OEM, ordered it on the way. One of the sacrifices of doing a job like this, sometimes you gotta break some parts to get them off. Incredibly rusty. No doubt that water pump leak was going right down in here. Also, just wanted to point out, here's the Woodruff key. It should not be rusted. So I've got a new one of those coming. I'm gonna put some anti-seize when I put this thing back together. This is incredible. Look how much damage the Woodruff key even took. Took a little bit of a pounding trying to get it out. I mean, basically when this is locked in on that crank gear, it doesn't matter how much force you exert. With this amount of rust, it was basically welded in place. So I'm definitely gonna clean that up, probably use some steel wool maybe, get that surface rust off, and then put some good anti-seize on there. I'm not dealing with this again. And here you can see behind it, you can see that crank seal we're gonna be replacing anyway. What a job, guys. This is the stuff that makes a regular job that much more difficult, right? All right, next up on our list is removing the tensioner and the idler pulley. 14mm bolts. There you have it. Take off the tensioner and that little spring. Idler pulley, same deal, 14mm. Idler pulley off. So next thing we're gonna do is remove these cam seals here and here. Got some OEM factory ones from Mazda. We'll probably use this kind of a pick, get in here, kind of remove the gasket, and then make sure you don't scratch any of the inside sealing surface. You don't want to have a future guaranteed leak. So go ahead and pry both those out. To make this job a little easier, removing these cam seals, go ahead and just loosen up these 10mm. Good sign right there is when you have fresh oil underneath. That's a big indicator right there that it was seeping. New cam seal will go in with the metal surface or the opening facing towards the engine. Easy as pie, just slip in there, make sure it fits tightly. It should. We're gonna go ahead and torque these down. These are very lightly torqued down. Anything into aluminum, as you know, you do not want to over torque, so go ahead, hand tight them. Perfect, look at that. Gonna go ahead and do the same on the other side here. That's just the thing with these older engines, guys. As you get up on mileage, this rubber, think of the heat cycles. How many heat cycles has it gone through? It can only last a finite amount of time, right? It's not the engine failing, it's these little pieces of rubber. Seals look great. All right, time to pull this water pump out of here. We're gonna do, I think these are 12mm, so I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts to pull, and then we'll pull that water pump out. You know, first things first, I think I'm gonna actually pull this thermostat neck off first. I think that is also 12mm. No gasket, just a little rubber O-ring in here. I'm gonna see if I have another replacement for that. Might as well. It doesn't look like it was leaking, but hey, why not? In addition to these 4 bolts, there's two holding this little section that comes off, this little neck here. They can be a little tricky to get to, that's for sure. Looks like there's an extra one over here by the alternator too. So we've got a ratcheting 12 and a regular 12. All right, and here we go. That's why it's important to always have your drip pan in place. Ta-da! Now what you're really gonna wanna do is get in here and clean all these gasket sealing surfaces. Same goes with this water neck. When I say get in there and clean those sealing surfaces, I mean it. Just scrub the heck out of everything here. The cleaner the mating surface, the more likely you're gonna get a solid seal between the gasket material and the engine. And that's what you're looking for. You don't wanna put your, God, can you imagine putting your water pump back in, not scraping that surface down, and then having it leak after doing all this work. So go ahead and get in there and really scrub these surfaces. So the front crank seal. This thing can kind of be a bear to pull out. So let's see if we can poke at it and get it out. Same rule of thumb as these guys, except we can't use the cheat mode where we kind of loosen these collars up here, but we can just pry at it and we'll try to pull it right out with a pick. All right, we got the front crank seal out. As you can see, we had to mangle it quite a bit. These things don't give up without a pretty big fight. So had to bring in the big guns, little small pry set, and then stepped up to my larger hooks here and just kind of punctured and pulled and hoped for the best. You want to be careful, you don't want to score up that surface, make it never seal right again. So just be careful, but yeah, know that you are going to use some force to get this out. Time to insert the new front crankshaft seal. What I like to do is first off thoroughly clean the area. I'm sure there's going to be some debris left over if you had to wrestle with it like I did to get it out, the old one. Take your small pick and go ahead and clear any debris you can see. If there's any extra material in there, the new seal will not seal completely. So just, you know, be smart, kind of just probe in there. Don't scrape it all up like a maniac, but get in there and just make sure, like, even the littlest pieces of debris you don't want in there. Okay, everything's looking pretty good there. Grabbing just a little bit of oil, help slide this thing in. Every little bit helps, right? So it's gonna be a pretty tight seal. Obviously you're facing it with the open end in, and you're gonna go ahead and just make sure it's centered perfect there. A tip here is not to force one side in more than the other, because then the gasket can get all weird. So slide it in, try to make it as even as possible when you're pushing this in. Now you need to get this gasket flush with that surface. There's a couple ways out there to do this. A good way to do it is to use the actual bolt and the crank gear and kind of tighten that down on there, and that's a good way to force it in. So I think that's what we're gonna go with here. And there we go, that seal should be in there nice now. Let's go ahead and loosen it out. Alright guys, let's go ahead and slam this water pump back into its new house. The strategy here, before we place the water pump on, this is going to be the orientation it goes in. I'm going to go ahead and put a little RTV kind of around here where the gasket's going to sit, and then a little bit between the gasket and the actual water pump, and that's recommended by most folks. A little extra layer of protection. Don't go overboard, just a very thin layer. Alright, we've applied our silicone RTV around where we're going to seal, and the gasket's on there. To help put it into place, I like to go ahead and put these top two bolts in just to kind of guide it in. It's a pretty good strategy to slide it in right the first time. Boy, that's pretty. What I like to do is leave it a little loose because I want to do this connector here. Now I've already done the O-ring further down. If you follow this hard line down, there's a little O-ring that you replace further down the pipe here. Kind of goes around where the exhaust manifold is. So that's been replaced. I need to get this gasket now, and it's nice to have a little bit of play in the water pump and this before you go ahead and do that. So we're gonna do the same thing. This is the actual gasket we'll be installing. We're gonna put the RTV on both sides of this and just simply mush it in there. Go ahead and bolt that down first before we tighten down the water pump. A little tip to save you some discouraging moments in the near future. Okay, we've got the little gasket ready for this neck over here. So we're gonna go ahead and slide that into place. Obviously paying attention to where these holes are. You gotta line them up obviously where those 12mm bolts slide in. And that's where it comes handy to have that little bit of play still in the water pump. With that neck attached, let's go ahead and put in the final bolts here for the water pump. And then once you're finished tightening down the water pump, go ahead and do the 2 bolts on this water neck right here, and you'll be good. We made it through it. So the water pump's out, new water pump is in. That's a great step forward, right? So replaced all the gaskets associated with that, took care of the cam seals, took care of the crank seal, so no more oil leaks from those locations. Always nice to get that taken care of. We've also gone ahead and removed our timing belt and all the accessory belts. Pretty much, we are just setting ourselves up to finish the job on the next episode. A little setback is something that you can't plan for. Of course, breaking that crank gear is unfortunate. I shouldn't have pried that hard against it. That being said, a water pump leaking on it for an extended period of time really created a rusty basic weld job. So that part wasn't coming off without a fight, clearly. So we got the new part ordered. I went ahead and ordered another Woodruff key. So we'll go ahead and put new components in when we put it all back together, and hopefully won't have any issues with that in the future. So thanks again for tuning in, guys. As always, I appreciate you checking out the channel, and we'll see you next time in the Auto Obsessive Garage. Take care. Thanks.